Three alien children stumble out of the desert heat, carrying their dying brother on a stretcher. Their blue eyes plead with the exiled soldier who wants nothing more than to be left alone. But when they beg for help against a venomous bite, he faces a choice that will shatter his isolation forever. The twin sons of Taros 9 beat down on the cracked earth, turning the abandoned mining facility into an oven. Ryan Matthews moved through his daily checks with military precision, his movements economical and practiced. He tested the air filters, calibrated the solar collectors, and logged the dwindling water reserves, each task performed with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times before. His eyes never lingered on the small blue vial tucked in the med kit. That vial was anti-venom for the Taros sand viper, the planet's deadliest native predator. One bite caused systemic paralysis, shut down the lungs in minutes. He'd traded half his rations for it months ago. It was his last insurance, his final connection to the world beyond this dust-choked rock. The shelter hummed around him, systems running on minimal power, enough to keep a man breathing, not enough to make it feel like living. Every item in the cramped space had a survival value. Every memory from before his exile stayed locked down tight, same as the weapons he'd stashed under the floor panels. This wasn't a home. It was a self-imposed sentence. Ryan's hypervigilance was a habit now, a constant background hum in his mind. He scanned the horizon through dust-caked viewports, listened for anything that wasn't wind or shifting sand. Exiles like him often developed those patterns, always waiting for the next threat, the next mistake. He was good at waiting, good at being alone. He'd prepared for sandstorms, equipment failure, even a viper strike. He had contingency plans for contingency plans. The blue vial was part of that. It represented control, safety, a way to cheat death one more time if the desert decided to collect. Then a sound cut through the silence, high, strained, utterly foreign. Not the wind, not machinery, voices. Children's voices carried on the hot air from somewhere beyond the compound walls. Ryan froze, hand halfway to the security panel. His routine shattered. His isolation fractured in an instant. He wasn't prepared for this. Three figures materialized from the heat shimmer, their blue skin a stark slash of color against the endless orange sand. They moved slowly, unsteadily, two girls supporting a makeshift stretcher between them. A smaller boy lay on it, his body limp. Their steps kicked up little puffs of dust, each one a testament to their exhaustion. Ryan's training kicked in before his shock could settle. He identified them instantly. Ceruleans. He'd seen their kind before, brief encounters on the fringes of civilized space during his service. Their distinctive cobalt skin and large luminous eyes were hard to forget. But he'd never seen them like this, desperate, scared, and so incredibly young. The oldest girl's eyes locked onto his. They held a depth of fear that spoke of hours spent fighting the desert. Her voice, when it came, was thin and strained from the dry air. "Please," she said, the word barely a whisper yet carrying the weight of a scream. "The Viper. He is our brother." His gaze dropped to the boy on the stretcher. The symptoms were textbook. The skin around the boy's ankle was a deep, ugly purple, the mark of a Taros sand viper's fangs. His chest hitched with shallow, labored breaths. Pallor had washed the blue from his face, leaving a sickly, grayish cast. He had minutes left, maybe less. Ryan's hand went to his pocket, his fingers closing around the cool glass of the anti-venom vial. The solid weight of it, once a symbol of his own security, now felt entirely different. It was no longer just his insurance policy. It was the only thing standing between this child and a suffocating death in the dust. There's a documented instinct, a hardwired response in humans to protect childlike species. In that moment, Ryan felt it like a physical pull, an order from some deep, ancient part of his brain that overrode all his carefully built walls. They're desperate. Silent trust was a weapon more effective than any plasma rifle. It dismantled his solitude brick by brick, aiming directly at the core of him. He'd built this exile to keep everything out, especially the complications of caring for anyone but himself. The smallest girl took another stumbling step forward. She didn't speak. She just reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against his. Her skin was cool, a startling contrast to the searing heat of the desert air. Her large eyes looked up at him, wide with a fear she couldn't voice, but they held no hint of deception, only a pure, desperate hope. His mind raced through the calculations. The cost of the vial, the months of scavenging, the risk of being left vulnerable. But his body had already made the decision. His protest died before it could form. He was moving, his soldier's instincts taking over, pulling the vial from his pocket as he dropped to one knee beside the stricken boy. The debate was over. The choice was made. He was in it now. Inside the shelter, the dim light caught the moisture in the children's wide blue eyes, making them shimmer like liquid under the harsh glow of the emergency lamps. Ryan's hands moved with an automatic steadiness, the kind drilled into him during field medic training years ago. He uncapped the syringe, his focus narrowing to the task. The blue liquid inside the vial represented more than medicine. It was his last tangible link to the organized galaxy, to proper supply chains and emergency evacs. His guarantee against the one thing on this rock that could drop him in under 5 minutes. The oldest girl, Lena, watched his every move. Her gaze was sharp, too knowing for someone her size. "The circulatory systems are compatible," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "Your norepinephrine analogs will work on our vascular receptors. The renal filtration rate is slower, but the antidote will bind before clearance." She spoke with a clinical confidence that didn't match her youthful face, rattling off biological terms like she'd studied them her whole life. Ryan didn't question it. On the frontier, you learned fast or you didn't learn at all. He pressed the needle against the boy's vein, the skin there already discolored and tight. The antivenom flowed into the small body, a blue thread of hope against a purple sea of poison. Frontier medics often worked like this, improving, adapting, using whatever they had on hand for species they barely knew. Textbooks didn't matter out here. Results did. The vial emptied. Ryan watched the last drop vanish. That was it. His primary survival advantage gone. The weight of it settled on him. But it wasn't the loss of the anti-venom that pressed down. It was the weight of 4 young lives now looking to him for protection. Their silent, watchful presence filled the cramped shelter, replacing the hollow echo of his solitude. He was responsible now, for all of them. He kept his fingers on the boy's wrist, feeling for the pulse. It was thready at first, weak and irregular. The sisters held their breath, a collective stillness in the dim space. Then the rhythm strengthened. The boy's chest rose in a deeper, cleaner breath. The grayish pallor began to recede from his skin, the natural blue returning like tidewater washing over sand. Ryan didn't need to say anything. The change was obvious. The tight knot in his own chest loosened. He looked from the sleeping boy to the 3 sisters, their postures softening with a relief so profound it was almost physical. His exile, his punishment, his solitary sentence, it was over. It had ended the moment he made the choice to care about something more than his own survival. The desert outside was still harsh, the twin suns still unforgiving, but the inside of the shelter felt entirely different. He had a purpose now. It was terrifying. It was exactly what he'd been avoiding, and it was already too late to turn back. The shelter's metallic walls absorbed the sound of movement, the scrape of crates, the low hum of the life support system. But now they also held the soft, musical cadence of alien speech and the occasional hesitant laughter of children. The place was no longer just a survival pod. It had become something else entirely. A cramped, improvised home, smelling of recycled air and the faint, sweet scent of the cerulean children's skin. The sisters, Lena, Sari, and Ta, organized their meager possessions with an efficiency that was almost unsettling. They laid out their few items of clothing in neat folded squares, stacked their personal effects in perfect alignment against a bulkhead, and allocated shelf space with the precision of quartermasters. Lena directed the younger 2 with quiet authority, her eyes missing nothing. Ryan's solitude, once a carefully maintained fortress of silence and routine, had been thoroughly dismantled. His space now held the constant, low-level hum of their activity, a sound that was both an intrusion and, increasingly, a comfort. They proved far from being a burden. Their small, clever hands were adept at tasks he'd grown tired of. Lena could recite their entire supply inventory from memory, tracking every nutrient bar and water capsule without needing to check the logs. Sari had a knack for spotting frayed wiring and weak seals long before the systems flagged them. Even young Ta took her duties seriously, polishing viewports and sweeping sand from the airlock with a solemn focus. They didn't ask for praise. Their help was a silent offering, a form of gratitude that was practical, not emotional. Mo, the boy, recovered slowly. His strength returned day by day under their collective, watchful care. He would sit propped against a crate, his blue skin still a shade too pale, and watch the others work. Ryan found himself making adjustments without even thinking about it. His morning perimeter sweep now included a visual check on the children. His ration calculations factored in their smaller sizes and different nutritional needs. His old routines, built for one, were being quietly and completely rewritten for 5. There's a documented pattern in these situations. Human caregivers, even hardened ones, often form powerful attachments to alien children within weeks of cohabitation. The bonds form quickly, built on shared proximity and mutual dependence. Ryan felt it happening. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was in the way he'd automatically put himself between them and the door when an unfamiliar sound echoed outside. It was in the way he started listening for all their breathing sounds at night before he could sleep. They began teaching him their language. The words were fluid and melodic, a stark contrast to the rough, clipped tones of his own. Lena would point to objects, enunciating the cerulean term with patience. Kethra, she'd say for water. Senna, for light. Ryan would repeat the words, his tongue clumsy around the unfamiliar syllables, and the girls would smile, a quick flash of white teeth. They shared fragments of their customs, stories of their homeworld's twin moons and silver seas. It was an exchange. He provided safety. They provided a piece of their world. One evening, as he watched the 4 of them sharing a meal of rehydrated rations, the reality of it struck him with a quiet force. His hand wasn't resting near his hidden weapon. He was simply watching them. The soldiers' constant calculation of threats and advantages had been replaced by a different kind of math. He was no longer just responsible for his own survival. He was responsible for theirs. The weight of it was immense, but it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like an anchor. He had become the guardian of something infinitely more valuable than his own life, and he knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute that he would protect them with everything he had. A scream tore through the atmosphere, a violent sound of tearing metal and tortured engines. Ryan's head snapped up from the comms panel. He was at the shelter's entrance in 3 long strides, his body already shifting into a threat assessment posture he hadn't used in months. A ship sleek and dark plummeted from the sky. It trailed a thick plume of black smoke and licks of orange fire, a dying comet streaking toward the horizon. His eyes tracked its descent, calculating trajectory, speed, potential impact zone. Military training took over, shoving aside the civilian habits he'd built. This wasn't a controlled landing. This was a crash, a violent, uncontrolled entry that spoke of catastrophic failure or something worse. The ground trembled when it hit, a deep, visceral shudder that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. The tremor was too strong for a simple engine malfunction. That kind of impact suggested a complete loss of control, a ship that had fought its way down. He turned, his movements sharp and efficient. He crossed the room to a hidden panel in the floor, the one he'd hoped never to open again. The lock hissed. Inside, cradled in foam, lay his service rifle. The weight of it was a forgotten language in his hands, both jarringly familiar and completely alien. The cool polymer of the grip, the faint smell of cleaned metal and old oil. He checked the power cell out of habit. Full charge. He was armed now, properly. The children had frozen at the sound of the impact. They clustered behind him, a small, silent formation of wide blue eyes and tense shoulders. Their fear was a physical presence in the room, a cold draft in the recycled air. They didn't cry out. They just watched him, waiting for his reaction to define theirs. Lena edged forward, her sharp eyes fixed on the distant column of smoke. She squinted, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her voice, when it came, was a low whisper, all the musicality gone from it. Valerian, she said. The single word landed like a stone. The markings on the tail fin. House Valerian. The name meant nothing good. Their private fleet was legendary, a symbol of wealth and power built on cutting-edge technology and ruthless enforcement. Their ships didn't just crash. They were among the most advanced and reliably maintained vessels in the sector. This changed everything. A Valerian wreck on his doorstep wasn't an accident. It was an event. Whoever was in that ship, whoever had walked away from an impact like that, they weren't just lucky. They were either phenomenally skilled or had a will to survive that bordered on feral. They represented a new, unpredictable variable, a piece of shrapnel flung into the careful ecosystem of their survival. He motioned for the children to stay put, a sharp downward chop of his hand. They nodded, pressing closer together. He moved to the viewport, raising a pair of macro binoculars. The wreckage smoldered in the distance, a dark scar on the orange sand. Heat distortion shimmered above it. Then he saw it. Movement. A single figure pulling itself from a torn section of the hull. The form was slim, humanoid, its blue skin streaked with dark soot and something darker. Blood. A survivor. One. Just one. She moved with a fluid economy of motion that spoke of intense training, a predator's grace that her injuries couldn't mask. Her eyes, a deeper, more violet blue than the children's, never stopped moving. They catalogued the shelter's layout, the thickness of the bulkheads, the placement of every vent and conduit, even as Lena carefully cleaned the gash on her shoulder. The girl worked with a quiet competence, using their limited medkit supplies. The woman, Nilara, didn't flinch at the sting of the antiseptic. Her focus remained on the environment, on the man holding the rifle, on the exits. Her presence was a live wire in the room, crackling with unspoken danger and an immediate magnetic pull. She identified herself with a simple, flat tone. I am Nilara, a handmaiden of House Valerian. The title sounded too small for her. The way she held herself, the sharp awareness in her gaze, the subtle readiness in her posture, it all pointed to something far beyond simple service. Handmaidens in that house were known for their dual roles. They were trained in etiquette and protection, in service and combat. It was a unique and demanding discipline, producing individuals who could pour wine or neutralize a threat with the same polished efficiency. Her openness was disarming. She answered questions about her role with a blunt honesty that felt both genuine and meticulously calculated, a weapon in itself. Then she explained the expectations, the customs. Her voice remained neutral, a recitation of fact, but her eyes held a different story. Physical intimacy is considered a service for a handmaiden, she stated. A duty to those we are bound to protect and serve. It is part of the bond, part of the function. Ryan's jaw tightened. The concept was so foreign, so coldly transactional. It hit him like a physical blow. It was the antithesis of everything he understood about connection. He saw the flicker in her eyes as she said it, a tiny crack in the professional facade, a hint of something trapped beneath the duty. His response was low, leaving no room for misunderstanding. That's not how things work here, he said. Here, that's always a choice. The words hung in the air between them. Her neutral mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her gaze sharpened, focusing on him with an intensity that was entirely new. It was a look of pure, unguarded assessment, stripping away his exterior to see what was underneath. It was a look he hadn't seen directed at him since before his exile, a look that acknowledged him not as a soldier or an outcast, but simply as a man. The air in the shelter seemed to thin, charged with a new kind of tension. The attraction ignited between them instantly, a sudden, undeniable heat. It was there in the way her eyes stayed locked on his, in the slight parting of her lips, in the way his own pulse kicked against his ribs. It was a dangerous current, forbidden by her culture and complicated by their situation, a complication neither of them needed. But it was also inevitable. It was in the space between them, humming like a powered-up energy cell waiting for a touch to complete the circuit. The soldier and the handmaiden, the exile and the fugitive, held in a silent standoff that had nothing to do with threats and everything to do with the silent, powerful pull drawing them together across the cold metal floor of the shelter. Nilara's gaze swept across the shelter's security setup, a cool, professional assessment that missed nothing. She took in the basic sensor array, the manual door locks, the single camera feed on the main display. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes calculated vulnerabilities. Your defenses are adequate for scavengers and wildlife, she stated, her voice flat. They will not stop a Valerian extraction team. She turned to him, her violet eyes holding his. My ship's wreckage holds components, a primary sensor core, shield emitter fragments. We can build a proper defense grid. The proposal was simple. The implications were not. Every piece of Valerian tech they salvaged and integrated would make them stronger, yes. But it would also send a louder signal into the void. Each upgrade was a trade. More protection for more visibility. They were building a fortress, but a fortress draws attention. A beacon for the very hunters they feared. They were preparing for a fight, and in doing so they were inviting one. They worked through the Taros night, the twin moons casting long, stark shadows across the sand. Ryan led the salvage team to the wreck, his military awareness providing perimeter security while Nilara identified and extracted the critical components with a surgeon's precision. Back at the shelter, their partnership clicked into place. His understanding of field tactics and combat engineering met her intimate knowledge of advanced Valyrian systems. He'd suggest a defensive layout. She'd modify the power routing to make it viable. She'd propose a sensor algorithm. He'd pinpoint the blind spots in the terrain it needed to cover. They spoke in a shorthand of technical terms and tactical nods, their movements around each other practiced and efficient. The children became their crew. Lena, with her sharp mind, helped trace circuit pathways on the main console. Sari and Ta, with their small, agile hands, wormed into access panels to run new wiring. Even Mo, still recovering, sorted components and fetched tools. They learned the basic operations, their young minds absorbing the new language of security systems and power flows. Their involvement was quiet, focused, a shared effort that bound them all tighter together. Nilara's expertise was their greatest asset. She knew the technology because she'd been trained to maintain it, to protect it, and to use it. She could bypass encrypted security protocols on a salvaged emitter with a few deft commands. She recalibrated a sensor array designed for a starship to cover the ground around their little compound. This kind of innovation, this blending of human tactical doctrine with alien technological insight, often yields unexpected breakthroughs. They weren't just installing equipment. They were creating something new, a hybrid system neither side could have built alone. The shelter underwent a metamorphosis. Thick power conduits now snaked along the walls, humming with energy diverted from the main solar array. Holographic display panels flickered to life, showing a 360-degree view of the surrounding desert. The manual locks were replaced with biometric scanners keyed to their prints. Each new layer of defense, each secured connection and activated shield, increased their chances of surviving an assault. The place felt less like a refuge and more like a hardened command post. Ryan found his eyes drawn to Nilara as she worked. He watched the precise focus in her expression, the effortless way her fingers manipulated delicate wiring, the slight frown of concentration that appeared when she encountered a problem. There was a fierce intelligence in her movements, a competence that was its own kind of attraction. He admired it, more than admired it. Their partnership solidified not in words but in action. It was in the way their hands brushed when passing a tool, the shared glance when a system came online without a hitch, the unspoken agreement in a moment of sudden silence as they both listened to the same faint sound on the external audio feed. Each successful connection, both technological and personal, pulled them closer. The fortress grew around them, and so did the unspoken thing between them. A silent current running parallel to the new power lines in the walls. The triple moons of Taros 9 hung in a perfect, stark alignment, washing the desert in an unnatural silver light that erased all color and shadow. The world outside the viewport looked like a still, silent engraving. Ryan finished his sensor calibration, the display confirming a clean perimeter sweep. The children were asleep inside, their soft, even breaths a quiet rhythm over the shelter's familiar hum. He allowed himself one moment of stillness, watching the eerie landscape, the tension of the day a low thrum in his muscles. A soft sound behind him broke the silence. Nilara stood in the doorway, her form silhouetted against the dim interior light. She moved to stand beside him, her gaze also on the moons. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick, charged with everything they'd been avoiding. The professional partnership, the shared work on the defenses. It had all been a diversion from this. From the pull that had been there since the moment she'd looked at him and seen a man, not a tool. Her voice, when it came, was so quiet it was almost part of the desert's whisper. "In my culture," she began, her words measured, "what we feel, it is not permitted." She didn't look at him. Her confession hung in the air between them, a dangerous, fragile thing. A handmaiden's bond is to her house, her duty, her body. A relationship outside that, especially with another species, it is the deepest transgression. It voids all honor, all protection. She was speaking of cultural walls far higher and more rigid than any they had built around the compound. The taboos were ancient, designed to control, to restrict, to maintain a purity her house valued above all else. The penalty she left unsaid would be absolute. Ryan listened, his own breathing slow. His response wasn't a rebuttal. It wasn't a tactic. It came from a place deeper than doctrine or survival. Your culture isn't here, he said, his voice low and steady. We are. And here you choose. It was the simplest of statements, the most powerful one he could make. It acknowledged her truth and offered another one entirely. Her hand, resting on the cool metal of the console, shifted. Her fingers brushed against his. The touch was electric. Her skin was cooler than his. A constant, subtle difference he'd noticed before. But in that moment, the temperature felt irrelevant. It was just skin, just a point of contact that sent a current straight through him. His own hand turned, his fingers lacing with hers. The connection was solid, real. It defied every restriction she had just named. Interspecies relationships are never simple. Biological differences can be the smallest hurdle. The real challenges are cultural. The weight of tradition and expectation. The sheer force of what a society deems acceptable. The moment stretched, a silent acknowledgement of the sheer scale of what they were risking. It was filled with the ghosts of her old life, the uncertainty of their future, and the very real possibility of losing everything for a single, undeniable feeling. She turned her head then, finally looking at him. Her violet eyes were dark in the moonlight, holding a storm of conflict and want. She leaned in close, her movement fluid and deliberate. Her breath was warm against the side of his neck, a shocking contrast to the cool desert air seeping through the viewport. Her lips were centimeters from his skin when she spoke, her voice a bare exhalation that carried 3 words. I choose you. His answer wasn't verbal. It was physical, immediate, and absolute. His free arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her firmly against him. The movement broke their handhold only to bring their bodies into full contact. His other hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in the silken strands of her hair. He dipped his head, his forehead resting against hers. The compound, the sensors, the waiting danger outside had all faded into a distant hum. There was only the silver light of the triple moons, the warmth of her body against his, and the silent, irrevocable seal of a choice made in the dark. Nilara didn't make the reveal a dramatic production. She simply placed the small, metallic data chip on the central console. It was unassuming. A sliver of dark tech no larger than her thumbnail. This is why they shot me down, she said, her voice flat. The price on her head wasn't for leaving her post. It was for taking this. House Valerian has a silent partner. The Dravik Corporation. The chip, she explained, contained more than secrets. It held proof. Financial transfers routed through shell companies. Private communications between Valerian lords and Dravik executives. Weapon development contracts signed in blood and credits. It was a comprehensive record of a collaboration built on profit and power. A union of aristocratic influence and corporate ruthlessness. Possessing it didn't just make them fugitives. It made them targets of the 2 most powerful, interconnected entities in the sector. Their combined reach was absolute. Their retaliation would be merciless. Then her tone shifted. The professional distance she always maintained evaporated. Her voice grew softer, tighter, edged with a raw anger Ryan had never heard from her. She began detailing the specifics, and the truth was uglier than he could have imagined. The collaboration wasn't about trade or technology sharing. It was about exploitation. She spoke of forced labor camps disguised as cultural exchange programs, medical experiments on cerulean populations, testing bioweapons and neural inhibitors under the guise of philanthropic aid, whole villages that had quietly disappeared from census data, their populations becoming test subjects for Dravik's latest hardware. The atrocities were systematic, cold, and profitable. The 4 children had gathered silently to listen. They stood perfectly still, their large blue eyes fixed on Nilara. They heard the names of their own cities, their own regions, spoken in the context of these horrors. You could see the shift happening in their faces in real time, their understanding of their own people's recent history, the unexplained disappearances, the sudden arrival of off-world benefactors, was being rewritten before them. The fear in their eyes was being slowly replaced by a colder, harder light, the light of understanding and of a deep, silent fury. Ryan looked from the children's faces to the chip. He recognized its power immediately. This wasn't just leverage. It was a catalyst. If this data reached the public net, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a detonation. It would shatter the carefully constructed legitimacy of a great house and one of the galaxy's largest core. It would ignite controversy, outrage, and almost certainly a violent retaliation from the exposed parties. The kind of black operations that kept these kinds of partnerships hidden were always extensive, always well-funded, and always terminal for anyone who threatened them. Their mission was no longer about hiding or even just surviving. The goal had fundamentally changed. They were sitting on information that could start a war or stop one. They had become, by sheer accident and one woman's courage, a resistance cell of 5. Nilara's entire bearing changed as she laid out the tactical reality. The handmaiden was gone. In her place stood the protector, the strategist, the assassin. Her assessments were cold, clear, and brutal. She outlined the likely response times of Valyrian strike teams, the types of ships they would send, the methods they would use to try and silence the signal before it could spread. The resolution was quiet, and it was unanimous. There was no vote. There was just a shared look, a collective intake of breath. They would broadcast it. They would send the raw, unedited truth of House Valyrian and the Dravik Corporation, screaming across every channel, every public and private frequency they could access. They knew what it meant. It was a decision that signed a death warrant. It would paint the biggest target possible on their little compound in the desert. But the alternative, staying silent, letting the horror continue, was no alternative at all. They were committing to a fight they would likely lose for a truth that had to be heard. The trading post was a collection of rusted shipping containers and patched-up shelters clinging to the edge of a dusty canyon. It smelled of ozone, cheap fuel, and unwashed bodies. Decker's crew stood out not because they tried to, but because their very presence seemed to warp the space around them. They operated in the gray areas, their moral compass permanently skewed, but their hatred for House Valyrian was a fixed, burning point. It was the one thing about them that was absolutely reliable. Ryan met them in the shadow of a gutted freighter, his eyes doing a quick, professional scan. He assessed weapons, stance, the way they watched the sparse crowd. He noted their modified ships parked haphazardly nearby. The vessels were a patchwork of different tech, hull plates welded from mismatched alloys, engine cowlings fitted with non-standard afterburners. They showed a raw, desperate ingenuity. These weren't factory models. They were survivors cobbled together from whatever worked. Their capabilities were an unknown variable. Their motivations were the real question. Trusting them went against every instinct his military career had carved into him. Smugglers were opportunists. Their loyalty was to the highest bidder or the easiest score. Decker himself was a lean man with cold eyes and a smile that never seemed to warm his face. He offered aid with that same hollow grin, his terms simple. "We don't want your credits," he said, his voice a low rasp. "We want your information. Whatever you have on Valyrian, that's the price." It was a dangerous trade. Information was a currency that could be spent many times over. Ryan's gaze flicked over the crew. They were a mixed bag of species, a hulking Graythan with cranial implants, a pair of quick-eyed Tarkelians, a human with a cybernetic arm. That kind of diversity wasn't accidental. It spoke of wide-ranging connections, of operations that crossed borders and jurisdictions. They had fingers in a lot of pies. Independent smuggling networks often develop better intelligence than official channels. They hear things in the ports and bars that never make it to a military briefing. They operate in the places the law ignores. Decker's personal grudge was the key. He mentioned it offhand, a single bitter comment about a Valyrian confiscation that had cost him everything years ago. That hatred made him a reliable ally against the house, but it also made him unpredictable, a man motivated by revenge as a wild card. He might hold the line, or he might break formation for a chance at a personal score. It was a calculated risk, but they provided exactly what Ryan needed. Not just the crates of military-grade plasma rifles and body armor loaded onto a repulsor sled. Not just the cases of concentrated rations and medical supplies. They provided mobility. They offered the use of their ragged fleet, their knowledge of hidden approach vectors and unmonitored space lanes. It was the one thing his fortified shelter could never give him, a way out if it came to that. He left the dusty trading post with the repulsor sled gliding behind him. The weight of the new weaponry was a tangible promise of violence to come. The smugglers were a loose thread, a potential complication he'd have to manage. But as he made his way back across the burning sand, he knew the calculus had changed. He wasn't returning to the compound alone. He was bringing back reinforcements. An alliance forged not on trust, but on a shared enemy and a mutual need. It was a dangerous game, adding these wild cards to the deck. But against the house they were facing, he needed every card he could get. The shelter was no longer a shelter. It had become a compound, a hardened knot of technology and defiance planted in the middle of the desert. The original structure was now just the core, its walls reinforced with smuggled plasteel plating, its perimeter extended by prefab barriers and sensor towers. Layers of defense were woven together, a chaotic but functional tapestry of human, cerulean, and Valyrian tech. Every new emitter they mounted, every shield generator they brought online made them safer. But safety had a cost. Each addition was a new energy signature, a new metallic surface to reflect the twin suns. They were building a bastion, and in doing so, they were painting a target on it. Nilara stood at the central console, her fingers flying across the interface. She coordinated with two of Decker's tech specialists via a crackling comm line. The specialists, a Tarkelian and the human with the cybernetic arm, worked from their ship, sending data packets and diagnostic overrides. They were trying to make 3 different technological lineages, human mil-spec, Valyrian high-end, and smuggler jury-rig, talk to each other. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting control boxes that had never been meant to interface. It was a constant game of adaptation and compromise. A Valyrian sensor algorithm had to be modified to work with a human power grid, its programming patched by a smuggler's pirated code. The whole system was a beautiful, terrifying mess. The children's lives became a cycle of drills and preparation. Their training was intense, focused, and utterly necessary. Ryan ran them through emergency protocols with the calm, relentless precision of a drill instructor. He mapped out evacuation routes to 3 separate safe rooms, each stocked with water and basic supplies. He drilled them on lockdown sequences, on how to seal bulkheads and kill the lights. He taught them to move quietly, to use the compound's layout to their advantage. His military experience imposed order on the potential chaos of an attack. They learned it all, their young faces serious, their movements becoming automatic. They understood the stakes. This wasn't a game. Nilara's contribution was her insider knowledge. Her understanding of Valyrian tactics informed every single defensive decision. She knew how their extraction teams moved, their preferred breach points, their standard assault patterns. She pointed out a weak spot in their western flank that Ryan had missed, a shallow gully that could provide cover for an approaching squad. She suggested they layer their energy shields erratically, creating a fluctuating defense that would confuse Valyrian targeting computers, which were programmed for predictable military emplacements. Her input was invaluable, turning a strong position into a formidable one. A well-prepared defensive location, properly manned and supplied, can often hold against a force many times its size. They were banking on that fact. Crates of supplies were stacked in the deepest storage room. Rations, water purification tablets, medical kits, and power cells. They stockpiled for a siege because they knew Valyrian wouldn't send one team. They would keep coming. They would throw resources at the problem until the compound was dust and the data chip was ash. The place had transformed in a matter of weeks. It had gone from a lonely survival pod to a fortress and finally, to something even more complex. It was a home. It held their fears, their hopes, and the 4 children they were all prepared to die for. The air was thick with the hum of overworked systems and unspoken tension. Then the main sensor panel emitted a low, steady chime. A new icon appeared on the tactical display, blinking a soft, insistent red. One ship, then another, then 3 more. They were approaching from high orbit, their vectors converging directly on their coordinates. The hum of the compound seemed to drop an octave. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Ryan looked at Nilara. She gave a single sharp nod. The waiting was over. They were as ready as they would ever be. The ramp of the lead assault craft lowered into the swirling dust and Commander Thaxis stepped out. He didn't walk. He descended. His form was a study in augmented lethality, a fusion of organic muscle and polished cybernetics that moved with a single, terrible purpose. His cybernetic eye, a cold blue lens set in a scarred face, swept across the compound. It didn't just look. It scanned, calculated, and assessed with a speed no purely biological organism could match. He was the embodiment of a final solution, a man who had not come to negotiate or capture, but to erase. His soldiers fanned out behind him, their movements synchronized to the point of being unnerving. They moved with a mechanical precision that spoke of neural conditioning and cybernetic coordination. There was no wasted motion, no chatter, no hesitation. They flowed into defensive positions, weapons raised, creating a perfect tightening cordon around the perimeter. They were an extension of his will, a single weapon with a dozen barrels all aimed at the heart of the compound. The silence from their ranks was more threatening than any battle cry. Thaxis's reputation was a ghost that had arrived before him. Ryan knew the name. Everyone in the sector who had ever crossed paths with Valyrian enforcement knew it. Thaxis didn't take prisoners. He didn't accept surrenders. His methods were terminal and efficient. He was a scalpel, not a club, sent to cut out problems with extreme prejudice. He was the reason you didn't get a second chance with House Valyrian. A speaker on his armor crackled to life. His voice was a flat synthesized baritone stripped of all human inflection. It carried across the open ground, amplified and cold. You possess property of House Valyrian. Surrender the data and the traitor. Your deaths will be quick. The offer was an insult. It wasn't a choice. It was a statement of the inevitable. There was no mercy in that voice, only a promise of a clean end versus a messy one. Inside the control room, the children froze. The drills, the protocols, the brave faces, it all evaporated under the chilling weight of that synthesized voice. Their training was momentarily forgotten, wiped away by a sheer primal terror. They huddled together, their large blue eyes wide and fixed on the main display screen showing Thaxis's unmoving form. The fear in the room was a cold, sharp thing. Nilara's face lost all its color. Her hand went to the console to steady herself. Thaxis, she whispered, the name itself sounding like a curse. Valyrian's top executioner. He's never failed a retrieval. Her voice was tight, but her determination was a hard, cold flame in her eyes. She knew exactly what they were facing. The best of the best, sent to finish the job her former masters had started. The cybernetic enhancements that made Thaxis so formidable also came with a cost. They provided immense physical advantages, strength, speed, processing power, but they often created psychological vulnerabilities, a reliance on data over instinct, an arrogance born of superior technology, a disconnect from the messy, unpredictable nature of organic opponents. His confidence wasn't just tactical. It was absolute, radiating from him like heat distortion over the sand. He saw their compound not as a challenge, but as a task to be completed. He didn't hang back to direct. He didn't delegate the dirty work. He personally led the advance on the main gate. His movements were economically lethal, each step measured, each glance a tactical calculation. He was coming for them himself. He was the spear tip. Ryan's eyes met Nilara's across the control room. The sensor alerts blared. The external cameras showed Thaxis advancing, his soldiers moving in perfect sync with him. No words were needed. The look they shared said everything. It was a final silent confirmation, an acknowledgement of the nightmare at their door, a promise of a stand together. The planning was over. The waiting was done. What came next was violence. The first plasma blast hit the outer perimeter shield with a concussive thump that rattled the deck plates. Then another. And another. The Valyrian forces weren't just probing. They were testing, searching for weak spots in the layered defenses with controlled, brutal efficiency. The compound shuddered under the assault, the air filling with the sharp scent of ozone and heated metal. Inside the control hub, the strategy unfolded. Nilara's voice was calm over the comms, directing Decker's fighters. They weren't meant to engage directly. Their role was diversion. A smuggler ship would swoop low over the eastern ridge, drawing fire, creating a momentary distraction. In that window, Ryan's team moved. He led a small group, two of Decker's more capable crew, into the pre-designated killing zones between the outer and inner walls. They laid down a brutal field of traps. Proximity mines scavenged from the Valyrian wreckage, sonic projectors tuned to disorient. They turned the ground between the barriers into a gauntlet. Thaxis adapted with terrifying speed. His cybernetic eye processed the diversion, the trap-laying, the shifting defense patterns. He didn't fall for the feints. He recalculated. His commands to his soldiers shifted instantly, his synthesized voice cutting through the chaos. They began bypassing the obvious traps, using concentrated fire to blast new, unpredictable paths through the defenses. His real-time processing turned their carefully laid plans into a constant game of catch-up. He learned from every move they made, and his response was immediate and lethal. Back in the central chamber, the children were at their stations. Lena monitored the comm traffic, her small fingers flying across the console, filtering out jamming signals. Sari and Ta watched the internal sensor grid, their voices small but steady as they called out troop movements. Mo operated a secondary power relay, his hands sure on the controls. Their competence under the immense pressure was a quiet, stunning fact. They were terrified, but they didn't break. They did their jobs. The battle raged across multiple fronts. Just as a Valyrian squad nearly flanked a key gun emplacement, covering fire erupted from a seemingly empty patch of desert. Decker's crew, hidden by optical camo nets, used their ragged improvised weapons to devastating effect. Their shots came from angles the Valyrians hadn't anticipated, their raw, unorthodox tactics saving positions that textbook doctrine would have lost. Their intervention was messy, unpredictable, and exactly what was needed. Nilara was no longer at the console. She was in the fight. She moved through the smoke and chaos of the outer corridors not like a soldier, but like a shadow. Her assassin training took over. She used the confusion, the debris, the panicked movements of the enemy soldiers themselves as cover. She didn't engage in prolonged firefights. She was a scalpel, a precise sudden strike to a vulnerable spot, a severed comms line, a disabled weapon, a silent takedown, and then she was gone, melting back into the chaos. Her lethality was a cold, efficient counterpoint to the raw violence of the battle. This kind of combined unit tactic, mixing different species and skill sets, often creates a synergy that pure, homogeneous forces lack. The unpredictability becomes a weapon. The human resilience, the cerulean calm under pressure, the smuggler's chaotic ingenuity, the Valyrian precision, it all wove together into a desperate, effective defense. They were holding. But Thaxus was the variable they couldn't contain. He broke through. He didn't bother with the main thoroughfares his soldiers were clearing. He simply blasted a new door through a secondary bulkhead with a focused plasma charge. His cybernetics had identified the fastest route to the center, to the data, to her. He stepped through the molten breach, his focus absolute. The central chamber lay ahead, filled with the sparks of damaged systems and the still forms of fighters from both sides who hadn't gotten out of his way. Ryan saw him enter. Nilara, slipping back into the room from a ventilation shaft, saw him too. Their eyes met across the chaotic space. No words were needed. They moved together instinctively, their backs meeting in the center of the room. His rifle came up, covering the approaches. Her hands held her twin blades low and ready. His style was broad, defensive, creating space. Hers was tight, lethal, designed for the close kill. They were utterly different. But in that moment, their motivations fused into a single, shared purpose. Protect the other. Protect the children. Protect the truth. The confrontation was here. Thaxus moved. It wasn't a step. It was a sudden, violent translation of intent into motion. His augmented strength didn't just power his blows, it made him a battering ram. Ryan met him head-on, his military training a stark contrast to the Valyrians' brutal, enhanced style. It was discipline against destruction, form against raw force. Ryan blocked a punch that felt like getting hit by a cargo loader. The impact vibrated up his arm, numbing his fingers. He answered with a controlled burst from his rifle, point blank. The plasma bolt sparked harmlessly against the composite armor plating on Thaxus's chest. Every defensive move Ryan made was a desperate act of survival. Every attack that landed was useless. Every second he stayed in the fight was a minor miracle. The tension was a physical pressure. Each of Thaxus's strikes, if it connected cleanly, would shatter bone. Each near miss whistled past Ryan's head with enough force to kill. He was fighting a machine wrapped in flesh, and he was losing. He gave ground, his boots sliding on the debris-strewn floor, his world narrowing to the cybernetic eye and the relentless advance. Nilara was the counterpoint. She didn't try to match strength for strength. She used her smaller size, her assassin's speed. She was a blur of motion at the edges of the fight, her twin blades seeking the weak points. She targeted the seams in his armor, the servos at his joints, the cabling that connected his enhancements. Her strikes were precise, clinical, a quick slash at the back of his knee joint, a stab toward the port at the base of his neck. She was a hornet, Stinging, distracting, searching for the one spot that would matter. Thaxis was forced to split his attention, his cybernetics tracking two threats moving in perfect opposing rhythm. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their coordination was a silent language built in a cramped shelter under desert moons. A slight shift in Ryan's stance told Nalara he was about to faint. A specific angle of her blade told him where she needed Thaxis's weight to be. They fought as a single unit, their movements a dangerous, intimate dance born of trust and shared purpose. They anticipated each other, covered each other, moved as one mind in two bodies. Thaxis saw it. His synthesized voice cut through the grunt of effort and the clang of metal. This sentiment, he rasped, deflecting a blow from Ryan and pivoting to block Nilara's lunge. This connection, it is a flaw, a vulnerability. It will be the reason you die. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a being who had purged all such weaknesses from himself. He saw their bond not as strength but as a structural fault he could exploit. He believed emotion clouded judgment, made you predictable. But the research in high-stress combat scenarios often shows the opposite. A strong emotional bond, a deep trust, can create a level of non-verbal coordination that pure tactical training cannot replicate. It allows for split-second decisions based on intuitive understanding, not just processed data. It makes a team more adaptable, more resilient because they are fighting for something more than a mission objective. They are fighting for each other. Nilara saw her opening. It was a tiny thing. A microsecond delay in Thaxis's response as his systems prioritized the heavier threat from Ryan. It was the gap she needed. She dropped under a sweeping backhand from Thaxis that would have taken her head off. She didn't try for a killing blow to his core. She drove her blade forward, aiming for the narrow gap between his armored chest plate and the reinforced housing of his cybernetic left arm. The metal was thinner there, the connection more vulnerable. Ryan saw her move. He knew what she was going to do. He didn't retreat. He did the opposite. He lunged forward, sacrificing his own defense, bringing his rifle up in a wild, high strike aimed directly at Thaxis's face. It was a suicidal move, a blatant, obvious distraction designed to draw the executioner's entire focus. Thaxis's cybernetic eye snapped toward the new threat, his arm coming up to block. It was exactly what Ryan wanted. It was the opening Nilara needed. Her blade slid home. It wasn't a deep wound, but it wasn't meant to be. It found the precise junction where neural interface cables met powered actuators. There was a sharp crackle of energy, a shower of blue sparks. Thaxis's left arm spasmed violently, then went limp, hanging uselessly at his side. His systems glitched, his balance faltered for a critical half-second. The surprise on his face was not one of pain, but of pure, utter disbelief. His expression was a frozen mask of confusion. He had calculated every variable, every possible move from a soldier and an assassin. He had not calculated on the power of a shared glance, a silent promise, a willingness to die for the person next to you. He had been defeated by the very thing he despised, the thing his enhancements had been designed to eliminate. He fell to one knee, his good hand going to the sparking wound, his single organic eye wide with shock. The sentiment he called a weakness had just broken his invincible machine. As Thaxis crumpled to the deck, sparks sputtering from his ruined shoulder, Nilara was already moving. Her fingers flew across the main console, bypassing the final security locks on the data chip's port. With a single, decisive press, she initiated the full transmission sequence. The chip's contents, a damning record of corruption and atrocity, began flooding across every frequency they could access. A digital scream into the void. The transmission was heavily encrypted, a necessity, but that encryption was a two-edged sword. It protected the data's integrity, but it also created a distinct traceable signal signature. They weren't just sending a message. They were lighting a beacon that screamed their location to the entire Valyrian intelligence apparatus. The reaction was immediate and absolute. House Valyrian would now throw everything it had at them, not to capture, not to interrogate, to silence. The full, terrifying weight of a great house's military and economic power would be directed at this single, dusty compound. Their survival was now measured in seconds, in how long they could keep that signal broadcasting before the hammer came down. From somewhere in orbit, Decker's crew answered. Their ships, bristling with stolen and modified tech, began a chaotic, powerful jamming operation. They flooded Valyrian command channels with screeching static and corrupted data packets. On the main display, Ryan watched the organized assault outside begin to falter. Valyrian troop movements became uncoordinated, their fire less focused. The smugglers were creating a blanket of electronic chaos, severing the link between the soldiers on the ground and the admirals in their starships. It was a temporary reprieve, bought with stolen technology and pure audacity. In the control hub, the children manned their stations, their small voices cutting through the noise. Lena called out packet completion percentages, her tone steady despite the concussions shaking the walls. Sari tracked the signal strength, reporting each successful hop across the galactic relay network. Mo monitored the power drain, ensuring the transmitter didn't overload the compound's strained grid. Their roles were critical. They were the guardians of the truth, their young eyes fixed on the screens that showed their message flying farther and farther from Valyrian's reach. Ryan coordinated the physical defense, his voice calm over the internal comm. The Valyrian troops, though disorganized by the jamming, were still numerous and well-armed. They pressed the attack, their assaults now born of desperation rather than strategy. He directed return fire, shored up failing shield emitters, and managed the dwindling ammunition reserves. The battle had entered a new, more brutal phase. The initial assault had been a surgical strike. This was a brawl. History has shown that the most decisive conflicts are often won not on the battlefield, but in the realm of information. A truth once released becomes an unstoppable force. This data was a weapon of mass disruption. It contained financial records detailing illegal fund transfers between hidden accounts. It held experimental logs from the bioweapons division, coldly documenting failures and fatalities. Most damning were the personal testimonies, the voices of those who had suffered, recorded in secret and hidden away. On a secondary monitor, a new alert flashed. A public galactic news channel, one of the major independents, had picked up the signal. Then another, and another. The encryption was being cracked by curious techs. The data packets opened and examined. Questions would be multiplying in newsrooms across the sector. The first tentative reports would be hitting the public net. The scandal was no longer contained. It was spreading. They had started something that could not be stopped. The data was loose in the wild, a virus of truth infecting the galaxy. But Valyrian's response would be equally unstoppable. The compound was the source. They would pour unimaginable force into this desert to crush it, to send a message of their own about the cost of defiance. They had lit the fuse on a revelation that would shake the sector to its core, and now they had to survive the explosion.